What's black and white and red all over? This book is. Hey everyone, Professor August here, and today I'm going to be talking about Ginseng Roots by Craig Thompson. It was published in 2025 by Pantheon, and this is a fabulous, fabulous graphic novel. Chapter 3 of this book will forever be on my Asian American Studies syllabus because it's incredible. I love commodity history and the history of products and trade, and I know it's really, really boring because I can talk about it for hours, and then I see people's eyes just glazing over because of how bored they get with the history of trade. Um, Chapter 3 of this book is about trade and colonialism and the expansion of trade and the intricacies of globalism. It's all in graphic novel form, so the fact that there are panels dedicated to this subject, I can now just excerpt and give to my students, which is fantastic. So I love this. So I'm going to talk about ginseng roots in this video, but I want to mention briefly before I get to what this book is about that this is a standalone book. You can read it on its own. It's not part of a series. So once you get the book, you have the entire collection and you can read through the graphic novel. It's great. But there are two other books that I think you might want to also pick up that are related to this book, Ginseng Roots. Um, Again, it's not a series, but if you kind of want a trilogy effect, like a loose trilogy effect, I would suggest picking up these other two books also. So this is Blankets. It was published in 2003, I think, like over 20 years ago. I think I was in elementary school or middle school, like really, really young when this book came out. I didn't read it until I was in high school. So it came out, I knew of its existence, but I was too young to actually like care. So when I read it, I fell in love with this book. Um, this book is about a brother, like brotherly love. So it's Craig and his brother Phil. It is a memoir style graphic novel, and it covers their childhood and uh, you know being brought up in a strict Christian household in Wisconsin. It's not the most ideal upbringing. There's also a lot of abuse that happens. The uh, babysitter is an abuser. Their parents seem really strict and religious. And then we also get Craig's first love story. So he falls in love with Raina, and you can sort of see their love blossoming. So there's a lot of themes of religion and connection and love and growth. This book, I have to say, when I first read it, so I've read this maybe two or three times. The first time that I read it, the reason I loved it so much was because it was so kind of naive. And I don't mean that pejoratively. I just mean there's an earnestness in the characters of this book that, like, that earnestness in people kind of gets beaten out of us as we grow older and society just jades us. And I don't know what it was about these characters. Well, I suppose because the author was much younger, like in his 20s when he wrote it. Um, at 20, you don't really know anything about the world. Sorry, no offense, but like, I thought I knew everything at the age of 20. I didn't. Now that I'm getting older, I'm realizing how much I didn't know at the age of 20. But there was this kind of earnestness in the author's perspective about his life and growing up that I think made me fall in love with the characters of the book. And then, because that book deals so much with like rural life and Christianity and strict religious households and first loves, the second book that he came out with when I was in graduate school uh, was Habibi. And this book, I gotta say, when it first came out, I was doing my master's in Islamic studies, and I was just so happy there was a book about Muslims and Islam that wasn't about like guns and terrorism. So I got this book, I read it. I think I've read it, I don't know, 10 times since then. Um, and I wrote a graduate paper about it and presented it at a conference because I loved it because there was so much. The pages in this book are so ornate and so meticulous. Um, and I think so. There are two things that are happening in this book. One is the story of culture. So there's a lot of Persian and Arab culture imbued in this book, and you can tell that the author did a lot of research. So that's kind of like the storyline is about a girl who gets married at a really young age, and then her husband passes away, and she ends up in like a harem. So that's like the cultural aspect of it. And then the religious aspect of it is what really drew me in, because the religious aspect is the author almost comparing and contrasting aspects of Christianity and Islam, and sort of posing questions and then struggling with the answers to those questions. So it treats Islam with a lot more respect than we typically see in Western media. And it, I don't know, it's a nice read just because you get to decide, like, you split the cultural aspects with the religious aspects. And the reason I'm harping on this is because, Islam in Afghanistan does not look like Islam in Egypt, and Islam in Egypt doesn't look like Islam in Morocco. That's because there is no common Unitarian style church in Islam. There's not like a pope that we all look up to. And so culture then from all of these different regions imbues itself in religion, which is why we have different aspects of Islam in Southeast Asia and Central Asia and West Asia. They all look different. That's primarily because of the school of jurisprudence Muslims might belong to, different schools of jurisprudence and different sects that they might belong to. And so I thought this was a great book. So book one was like a lot of rural Wisconsin. Book two totally diverges, but it's still dealing with a lot of the same themes and questioning religion and humanity. And then you get to this book, and this is kind of the sister book to Blankets, the first graphic novel. And this one is literally just a return to roots. It's called Ginseng Roots, and the author's returning to Wisconsin to deal with family roots, religious roots, and also literally ginseng roots, because that's where he grew up in Wisconsin, um, like working on the ginseng farms. So these three books together, I think, make up a loose trilogy that deal with the same themes of religion. So in this one particularly, it's not Christianity or Islam. We're dealing with like folk religion and like folk medicine. Um, I don't know, aspects of East Asian lore and Midwestern American lore. So I think those three books really work well together. So if you're interested in reading this one, I would suggest reading those other two when you get a chance also, because they work really well together. Ginseng Roots is about Craig Thompson. It's a memoir, sort of. Like, it's part memoir, part history, part oral history. So there's three things going on here. So the first aspect of the book is a memoir. And in his first book, Blankets, we get introduced to Phil and the parents alongside the narrator, who's Craig. Craig then, in this one, in Ginseng Roots, as an adult, goes back to Wisconsin. And it's kind of meta in that there's discussion of blankets in this book. So he talks to his family and his brother. Oh, and also he has a sister that did not make blankets, which I thought was an interesting sort of reveal, that um, Craig and Phil have a sister, and she's the youngest, but she just wasn't part of the blankets story. So she just doesn't make an appearance in that one. Um, Anyways, so we get the family history in a little more nuanced manner. So it's a little more, I don't know, mature. It's less uh, youthful. I don't know. I'm having a hard time kind of coming up with a word for blankets other than naive, because that's not really what I mean. But this new book is much more mature, and you can tell the author has had a lot more time to reflect on his life and on his family. And so his parents are shown in a totally different light in this book, much more kind of approachable and, I would argue, loving, and his brother also, and his sister also. So it's a really nice little vignette of who this family is now, or as an older person. Um, and by older, I don't mean like 90 years old. The dude's like middle aged. He's not that much older than I am. So, in his 40s, I guess. And so the family is fine. They're doing okay, it seems. They're in rural Wisconsin. Like, I lived in the Midwest. Rural areas in the country don't seem to be doing all that great, but they're alive and they're kicking, which is nice to see. Um, the history of the family is told through this child's lens, where he and his brother and his mom, and sometimes the sister, spend their entire summers on ginseng farms, weeding and picking rocks and collecting seeds. So, from the child's perspective, a dollar meant, they would get paid a dollar, which meant they could go get a dollar comic book at a comic book shop. And it seems like the family did this for a very long time. Craig Thompson, the author, did this for a long time. And then he grows up and he moves away to the West Coast. So, like, that's the kind of memoir part of it. The history part of it is the actual history of ginseng in the Midwest. And you kind of get this interesting history of America, Canada, and China, and the competition between these three countries in the production of ginseng, and the reliance each of these countries has on one another to sell the product. Um, it was really interesting to read certain sections of this book, because we see there's, like, rural communities are much more conservative and isolationist, but the product that they're growing requires globalization and this global trade network. And this dichotomy is just, it's one of those things where we watch politics in this day and age and we're like, why do people keep voting against their own interests? And I never get a satisfactory answer. I'm not a political scientist, so I'll leave it up to the political scientist folks to figure out. But it just does seem like there is a lot of conservative ideology that permeates this region, somewhat to their own detriment, even though the people just seem so nice to one another and they're able to lift each other up and, support one another. And yet there is this isolationist aspect where they don't want to have I don't know, like, foreigners come work their fields. But there's also aspects of the Hmong people working in the fields, and there's a chapter dedicated to immigrant labor. So there's one farm that solely relies on Mexican labor, and so the author does a really nice job of weaving all of these narratives of different groups of people working in rural Wisconsin and working in this industry that really does seem to be struggling. I mean, ginseng is not the easiest plant or easiest root to plant and grow. It's not as easy as other types of crops, because once you plant it, you can't plant on the same land again. So you have to, like, keep moving the plots. And there's also just aspects of bacteria and diseases that are incessant in the soil that attack the ginseng. So it's just, like, really interesting reading the history part of this book. The last part, or like last aspect of this book, is oral history. So as I was reading the book, there were parts where the dialogue just seemed a little off, where, like, the dialogue between Craig and Phil and, his family seemed normal, like part of his within his lexicon. And then there would be an introduction of a farmer, and the dialogue would just be off, or, like, it just wouldn't seem like dialogue that Craig Thompson would come up with. And I had to go look this up to see what the deal was with this, and it is actually oral history. So what Craig Thompson had done when writing this book was go interview farmers that he grew up with and record those conversations, and those are the ones that made it into this book. And so it works really well because it's actual real dialogue, and it makes this book partly anthropological oral history, which I think is really useful to have, because we don't really get a whole lot of recorded oral history from farmers living in the rural Midwest. And we get soy farmers and we get, I don't know, wheat farmers, but we don't really often, I've never actually seen oral history of ginseng farmers done before. So this is my first, like, real insight into the way that ginseng farmers in Wisconsin are thinking about their product, and they're thinking about trade, and they're thinking about globalization. So I thought this is a really good contribution to that part of sort of academic discourse. Um, Anyways, so those are the three aspects that I picked out from this graphic novel. It's actually really, really good. It's really well done. Okay, so final thoughts. You must read this book. I can't even lift them. They're so heavy. Good lord. This is almost 1,500 pages of graphic novel, and my arm is shaking because it's so heavy. Uh, do yourself a favor and pick it up. Pick up this book, Ginseng Roots, and take a gander. It is really well done. It's really good. I do think of the three, this is probably my favorite, because oh God, my younger self would say never because of Habibi, but Habibi is really good. But I think because I teach Asian American studies and ethnic studies, Ginseng Roots is probably my new favorite, just because I can teach it and teach parts of it in my classes and have students hopefully not glaze over as I talk about commodity roots and trade routes. We'll see. Anyways, if you're interested in picking up a copy of Ginseng Roots, I've put the publisher's information in the description box so you can go pick up a copy for yourself. And if you've read it, let me know in the description box or in the comments below. If you've read any of the other two, let me know. If you haven't, do yourself a favor and go get them because they're very, very good and worth spending, you know, I don't know, a nice Sunday afternoon looking at incredible art and panels and getting a good story. So, yeah, enjoy it. And I'll catch you guys in the next video. Okay, bye.
All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe below. Catch you in the next video.